Do you believe in alternate universes? You are listening to Delayed Replay, the improvised movie review podcast. Wink. Everything is fine here. We're all fine. Just sit tight and listen to them talk about the movies they definitely saw. Don't delay. We have to listen right away. Hello, listeners. This is Steven Schinder, and you're listening to Delayed Replay, the movie review podcast. And on this episode, we have an interesting topic from a franchise that's been around for a long time. We're talking about No Time to Die. That's right, the James Bond movie that came out in April. And on this episode, I have a very special guest whose name is Coffey, Joe Coffey.
Hey, Steven, how are you?
Pretty good. Now, for those not familiar, you have a James Bond podcast of your own, is that correct?
Yes, it's called Bond with Coffee. It started out as a project with my family. We love James Bond. We've seen them all. So we thought, hey, why don't we start with Dr. No and do a podcast where every episode we just talk about the film, praise it, poke fun of it, all of the above. It's a lot of fun.
Yeah, that's kind of what we do on this podcast too, like praise, pick fun at like all that stuff, like the good, the bad, and the ugly. So
yes.
And you've done the first 4 films so far.
Yes, we're about to start doing 2 or 3 per week. We had a bit of a dip in productivity, but yeah, so far the first 4 are out, and the 5th one will be coming out soon.
Yeah, those are really fun to listen to as well as watch because they're also available on video. So yeah, it's really cool. And what are your overall experiences with the James Bond franchise as a whole? Like, how'd you get into it? What has that been your overall experiences with it?
So I was born in 71. So I remember being at the movies in the late 70s and in 80s where, trailers for other films are on. And there was this awareness of Roger Moore as James Bond. And, there were some really bad Roger Moore films. And, if he's running across alligator heads or whatever, I mean, some of the ridiculous things in some of his films were kind of part of my first experience. By the time you get to college and you're renting movies from Blockbuster, and you're digging back into the canon to get caught up on everything, I realized, oh my gosh, these Sean Connery films are even better than the chopped up versions that they showed on UHF reruns. So by the time you could get box sets of all the films up to whatever point you bought it at, it was so much fun to just watch an old Bond film. And so I've brought that into my family. I've got 2 daughters. One's a senior in college and one's a senior in high school. And they have both seen them all at least 2 or 3 times because of this thing that I love to do and say, hey, who's up for a Bond? You pick. What are you feeling? Are you feeling Dalton or Brosnan or maybe Lazenby? And, the girls will pick one and we'll watch it. And that's a fun evening for us. So they never get old. I love to go back and watch them over and over. I always see new things I've never seen before.
Nice. The way I came into it was different. I remember as a kid, so I was born in 94, and I think when I was like 7 or 8 or maybe 9 or 10, I don't know, childhood blends together.
Yeah.
But,
Oh, yeah.
But I remember at some point, my cousins had a Nintendo 64, and I think they had the GoldenEye video game. I think that's what it might have been. And so I was familiar with like 007 because it was on the cartridge, but I didn't know the James Bond name per se. I just knew this as like a game where you go around in a building and try shooting opponents. I didn't know what the actual premise of it is or who I was playing as. And I think it was in 2012 when there's this one channel in the like channel 300 something, and they were having like a James Bond movie marathon, and I was like, might as well watch them just to see it, say that I've seen them all. And so I saw the 20 Eon films that were part of the same continuity, so Connery to Brosnan, and then
Hmm.
the Daniel Craig films, like the first two, and because Skyfall hadn't come out yet, but
Hmm.
at some point later when it was on DVD, I rented it, and I later rented Spectre.
Hmm.
I also saw within that same marathon, I think there was Never Say Never Again, the one where Sean Connery's older, and it's a remake of Thunderball. I saw that one,
Yes.
and I also saw this weird one from the 60s that was by a different company. It was called Casino Royale, but it had
Yes.
lots of different actors playing James Bond. Have you ever seen
It
that one?
was weird. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it even predated the idea of James Bond being played by multiple actors that we've gotten so used to. Like, other
Yeah.
than this 50s TV movie or something where it
Hmm.
was like an American version of Casino Royale. I haven't seen that, but it's weird to think
Yeah.
about.
Yeah, those are you mentioned two of the weirder things in the catalog, and I guess they're considered unofficial. But the rights were cleared, and the backstory about Fleming's ownership and who he said could write a screenplay, and Connery making a comeback. There were weird things going on with those movies, and you hear in interviews the Broccolis and the various people from Eon Productions. They like to act like those never existed, but they are out there for us to kind of poke with a stick and say, "What is this?"
I mean, it's like I don't know how good of a comparison this is, but it's kind of like how the Star Wars Holiday Special is a thing, or this
Yeah,
really old 10-minute animated version of The Hobbit that is almost nothing like the book is out there somewhere.
that's right.
it's,
The mysteries of the franchise.
it's so weird what's out there. But thankfully, we're talking about a more comfortable movie to talk about, No Time to Die, the most recent movie. How was the theater crowd when you saw it?
There were people in tuxedos. I guess that's cosplay as far as you can get, really, for James Bond. And there's a hype about new Bond films, and so I felt the energy. I didn't have to wait in line. I got my tickets ahead of time, but every seat was body in it. The place was packed, and I found it rather exciting. I tend to go to these big premieres on the big day, not the premiere, but the opening day, and it was just like all the others. Everybody there was stoked. Obviously, a big James Bond fan.
Yeah, I saw a couple of cosplayers when I went to see it. I went the morning after it premiered because like I just get super tired like the night of, and there are very few movies where I'll do like the premiere night thing, even though they've like moved it up from like 7 or 8 p.m. instead of like midnight now. It's like the midnight thing is even the thing anymore.
Yeah, yeah. And there is a downside. I think I missed a few jokes and a little dialogue because the theater was so lively. It was laughing in three spots and even cheered in one spot. And I think I missed some dialogue, but I guess that's the give and take when you go on opening day.
Like it kind of has two sides to it. Like on one hand, you're with an enthusiastic crowd and you can feel the energy, but on the other hand, it's like, can I please hear the movie?
Exactly.
I guess we'll just dive into like the beginning of this movie. Like we got I think this might be the longest cold open that a James Bond movie has ever had. It was like 25 minutes, which I guess is supposed to match how this is a 25th Eon film.
Ah, okay. Yeah, I was wondering. Yeah, it is a long one. It goes on and on, but reminded me of the cold open on From Russia with Love, with the training camp, and someone is portraying Bond, and you think it's him for a moment, but it's not. And so I found it gripping. I like it when, as an audience member, I can't predict what's happening. And after watching so many Bond films, that could be hard to do. But yeah, this cold open, I went from being excited to confused to kind of figuring it out to being double crossed by my own initial thoughts, and then the resolution. Here comes, the title sequence. I thought it was great. I've never seen a cold open like that before.
Yeah, because we do begin with some MI6 agents being trained, and then they get into this conversation, like talking about the legend James Bond, and you're thinking, well, wait, where is James Bond? And then we see that he's at this lake house with Madeline Swan, who it seems like they're married in this and have settled down like within a few years after Spectre, which I thought was an interesting choice.
Yeah, it's I guess it's not tired because it's just part of it. But when Bond is on a rogue mission, or he's retired or injured, and there's this whole thing about, will he come back? Will he get another assignment? And oh wow, like there's the love interest from the previous film, because sometimes you show up and you have no idea if it's going to be clean slate or if things are going to continue. And I guess when they did the clean reboot with Casino Royale in 2006, and they alluded to some henchmen and bad guys from the previous films, it was like, oh, okay, this is how they're going to restart. So yeah, Dr. Swan at the lake house, I thought, okay, and it makes sense because we never did fully understand what happened in the last film. And we understand her dad, but there were just so many loose ends. So yeah, it's what a way to start it. You immediately have to be like, okay, I'm getting caught up. Oh yeah, this is what's going on.
Yeah, and it seems like they're living a peaceful life, but then Swan gets something in the mail, and it's this mask, which I guess is supposed to look like a No type of mask. And for those unfamiliar, No is a Japanese form of dance theater, and this is something that the villain, who we see much later, wears. And after that happens, like, she's visibly scared, and then we see some assassins on jet skis out on the lake while James is like on his boat, and he has to like defend the place and like make sure they don't get to his wife.
I immediately thought about the symbology of No theater, and how those cypress carved masks are supposed to be expressionless, but the beauty in how they're made, when the actor on stage holds the mask, or his head or neck in a certain way at different angles, those masks can look like they're smiling or laughing or frowning. And it's so there are all these subtle things about that mask, but it's supposed to be based on an immediate presumption of zero emotion. So setting the tone for this film, I thought, wow, and they've always said, of all the Bonds, Daniel Craig, he's the rough and tumble one, and he's not falling on emotion through his acting. He's a stunt guy, and what he brought to the screen, the screenwriters, ever since his first one, have been playing off of that. So it's kind of fun to overthink sometimes, but that's where my mind went when I saw the No mask. I thought that was cool.
Yeah, and I kind of like how much later in the movie they kind of nickname the villain Doctor No because of this mask. That was like a fun little Easter egg
I caught
reference.
that. Yes, the first Bond film from 1962. Yeah, I love it. I love it. Which was also, interestingly enough, Dr. No, that villain, was supposed to be half Asian in that film. And so there are a lot of through lines in this, with some of the portrayals in this film, as well as the director of the film, who is the first American director and also of Japanese American heritage. So yeah, some neat through lines. As soon as the No mask appears, things started to come together.
Yeah, and the villain's name is Safin, but we'll get to him later. Just real quick, like right before recording this, I was thinking about how like delayed replay as an acronym looks like doctor, so DR. And
Ooh.
if you put no time to die after that, it's like delayed replay, no time to die. But if it's DR, it looks like Doctor No within
Oh, that's
that.
great. That's great. I love it.
Yeah, and this is episode 7 of the podcast, or like the 7th movie we've talked about. So, 007, I pretty much planned
Oh,
that.
nice. Love it.
Yeah, I'm hesitant to call it episode 007 because I don't know if I'll ever want to get to triple digits, but the 7 is in there.
That's cool.
The sequence on the lake is really cool, and because I've had a little bit of a phobia of being in like deep water growing up, I could kind of feel the tension as Bond and these assassins were fighting and they're like trying to drown each other, but of course Bond has to come out on top because like there's a whole rest of the movie that he has to be in.
Yeah, and I was wondering about that, almost waiting for someone to take off the Daniel Craig mask, and we see that it was, just another Spectre training exercise. But, as far as the water, the chase scene on the jet skis, and when they dipped underwater for just a bit and the fist fight broke out, I had to laugh because I thought of Thunderball. The underwater fights and the ridiculous sound effects that you would never actually hear in an underwater fight, they were just as ridiculous. I mean, it was thrilling. It worked. It wasn't like Benny Hill slapstick, but yeah, guys underwater punching and you hear, oh my God, I love it. It's so bad it's good, but they pulled it off. I think they pulled it off, and the scene was dramatic.
Yeah, I kind of like when franchises that have been going on this long, like they sometimes have to go through a more grounded and gritty phase to like appeal to some of the crowd, right? But I think it's nice when they
Yeah.
weave in some of the more campy, over the top stuff as like a reminder of like, oh yeah, there was this campier stuff that some of the fans enjoyed. So we'll try to strike a balance.
Yeah, and I think most of the theater got it when he emerged from the water after the fight. And it reminded me a couple of times some Bond women in the franchise emerged from the water in a very salacious kind of way, kind of hearkening back, quoting the other films. Halle Berry did it last. And so when I saw that, I thought, oh, wow, I thought we'd have 5 more films before we'd quote that scene again. But, another nice throwback to some of the older films.
Oh wow, I didn't even make that connection, but you're right. So yeah, he after he defeats them, he like gets to Madeline and he's like, we have to leave. And that's when we go into the opening credit sequence with the No Time to Die song by Billie Eilish, which I think is very hauntingly beautiful. It's a great track.
I would agree. There's something about the way that song moves. There's a lot of uncertainty in it, but as it starts to take shape and get dramatic, you can't really find singers like the early Bond films, with Goldfinger and some of those massive, huge vocal performances. So now it seems like these title sequence soundtrack cuts, they're always very dramatic. Starting with the most recent Casino Royale, and Chris Cornell, his voice. I think this is the first time we saw this, and so yeah, the No Time to Die follows suit in that it's dramatic and it isn't really a hook like For Your Eyes Only, something you'll actually hear on the charts and go to number 1, but it works for the scene and the cinematography. I thought it was really good, and if I'm sure you caught some of this too. Some of the lyrics matched up really well with like the silhouettes and swimming underwater and the guns. And, even when she says, we were a pair, but I saw you there, too much to bear. Call me crazy, but I swear one of those silhouettes looked like the shape of a bear.
Yeah, that was synced very well. There were even several seconds where it showed, like, I guess it was like a little homage to those GoldenEye type of games, like on N64, where you see like a blocky looking James Bond fighting some sort of adversary. And I thought that was a nice touch. And you see the like multiple versions of the No mask stacked on top of each other. And this struck me as something that feels like it might have been an homage, but like an homage to an homage. Because I don't know if you've ever seen the 1990s 3D animated show Reboot.
No.
Okay, so it's about characters who live in like a computer system. And they did this episode called Firewall, which basically feels like an homage to James Bond movies, even right down to the long 2 minute opening sequence with a similar sounding song, like a Bond sounding song, which is amazing.
You know, I got to tell you one thing about this song that kind of caught me off guard. I heard it wrong. You know, sometimes we mishear lyrics in a song. When Billy sings that I'd fallen for a lie, I thought she was singing that I'd fallen for a line, which, you know, so many famous lines are associated with James Bond, you know, Bond, James Bond, you know, they're a part of, you know, making the love interest, you know, fall for him. And so I thought that worked so well in the song because, you know, it was on the radio a little bit before the film came out. But it must have been the sound system or more clear or whatever in the theater. I could hear it. And she said that I'd fallen for a lie. And I thought, oh, well, okay. I guess that's the real lyric. It still makes sense. But I think it would have been better if she would have said that I'd fallen for a line.
Yeah, I know what you mean about the mishearing lyrics. Like for years, probably about over a decade, I thought that the song Panama was Cannonball. Like I've never actually looked at the lyrics to the song. I've only heard bits of it in movies, and it just sounded to me like Cannonball.
Oh, that's great. That's great. Yeah.
While Bond and Swan are on the run, they kind of go to this nightclub looking place, and there they're found by a familiar face. Wow, I did not mean for that to rhyme. It's amazing how that happened. They're approached by Felix, and he's like, "We need you to come back." And this beginning of this movie feels very much like Red Dragon to me, you know, the Hannibal Lecter novel.
Yeah.
And because, you know, it begins with the main character being like retired and by water, and then he's approached by someone from the CIA in this case, but FBI and Red Dragon to like come out of retirement and help. And Rafe Fiennes, who he played the killer in the second film adaptation of Red Dragon, which is just called Red Dragon, and Mads Mikkelsen, who played Hannibal on the TV show, which I've been rewatching. It's like one of my favorites. He played Le Chiffre in the 2006 Casino Royale movie. So
yeah, I was thinking about that too when Blofeld, when he was behind the glass thing, it was so Hannibal Lecter. I mean, my mind went right to that series too. I totally know what you mean. Surely that was on purpose, right? I mean, that was some classic stuff that to kind of quote those visuals. I thought that was a nice treat.
Yeah, because they have Blofeld in custody, and they're kind of consulting him because they think there's a link between him and Safin, the guy with the no mask, who has abducted this scientist they're looking for.
Valdo, right?
Yeah, Valdo. I think his last name was Obrachev. So Blofeld is basically doing the Hannibal Lecter thing of not giving them an answer straight away and trying to make them figure it out on their own while kind of giving them clues. But it's clear that there's a connection between him and Safin.
Yeah. And, you know, when they had the CIA gal in this one, Paloma, when she was trying to get info from Blofeld when he was, you know, secured, they had everything except the little mask on that they had on it, Hannibal Lecter. I mean, there was so much of a similarity between that back and forth, and here Blofeld having information, Paloma knowing he has it, but he's speaking in riddles and he's distracting her by he wasn't talking about eating her like a cannibal, but he was just the way he made her unsettled. It was a stark similarity to those other classic films.
Yeah, so for someone like me who's a huge, I guess, fanable, like I really liked these similarities, but I'm curious, like, what someone like you would think, who's like maybe coming in being like, I want to see a James Bond movie. Like, did these like similarities feel a bit intrusive, whether intentional or unintentional, or were you okay with them?
I was okay with them because they seemed serious, but when Bond was rolling around with Dr. Swan and they seemed to be quoting some sex moves from the Blue is the Warmest Color move in that cinematography, I thought, wow, that's a little bit much. Yes, we all watch a lot of movies, but yes, we caught that, but it just seemed unnecessary. I mean, it was cheeky, funny, but not as much as in the Roger Moore era. But I guess that is part of the franchise still today, right?
Right. And going back to Blofeld, just real quick, he does this long monologue. And what's funny is there's this website called TV Tropes, which lists various tropes, cliches, and such used in films, books, and whatnot. And they have like different names for all these types of cliches. And the one for like this villain monologue is called Hannibal Lecture, where where like the villain is doing this like long speech, like lecturing the protagonist. So I thought it was funny that they had Blofeld just chew up the scenery.
Yeah, it's always in the form of like a little lecture, I think, in these Bond films. And going all the way back to Dr. No, there's usually a moment where somebody, usually Bond, gets to give a little speech on something, whether it's the Walther PPK or somebody asks, what do you know about the Fabergé egg market? And then, Bond will just recite like an encyclopedia, summary. And it's interesting to, in this film, have that coming from Blofeld, who had the info and the expertise in that moment. Yeah, I thought that was great.
Yeah, I don't know how he remembers stuff like that. Like you said, having an encyclopedic mind, it's amazing. So yeah, we get refamiliarized with the mainstays M, Moneypenny, Q.
Hmm.
So it's great to see them again. But we also meet this new double O agent whose name is Nomi. And
Yeah.
I don't know if this was intentional or not, but like her name sounds like know me, like get to know me. And it felt like, I don't know if it was like a subliminal message that like the audiences should get to know this character because she's gonna be really important going forward. But I don't know, it's weird having that and like know me and the no masks, but there not being like a direct connection. It's, I guess it's like a repeated motif, intentional or not.
Yeah, some of the more ridiculous female names in the series, from Pussy Galore to, I mean, there's a whole long list of them. So when you learn these new characters' names, it's always worth really kind of looking at closely. And I think you're right. Know me is what it sounds like. And in pop culture, there's that whole "you don't know me." Well, actually, Bond gets to know her, and it's not the friendly, some other double agent in the field or one who just died and his death will be avenged. Here's a new double O who is going against Bond and is challenging him, and even a physical tussle, and but she's a female, and so will he go that direction? And so know me, we got to know her, and she was not like we suspected from that first scene. So I think the name, I think you're onto something. I think that was intentional, and I think that worked well. And I just like that it wasn't quite so over the top like Pussy Galore. It,
Yeah, that wouldn't really fly today. Yeah, I don't know if you've ever seen the Cats and Dogs movies, but the second one is called The Revenge of Kitty Galore.
oh, that's funny.
So after they get a bit of information from Blofeld, they go to Matera in Italy.
Hmm.
And this is where they kind of have this fight against a soldier named Primo. Yeah, what'd you think of that whole sequence?
Well, I like the part when Bond, he takes his licks in a fight. He gets hit a few times and then he hits people. And when he got hit in the cheek, and that guy was wearing his Spectre ring, and so the when the octopus imprint stayed on his cheek for just a second, I thought that was great. I thought, and it's in the middle of all the action, there was that one little moment of, oh, did you catch that? But it went by so fast. They didn't stay on the shot so long; it was like overdone. But I thought that was fun. It kind of reminded me in the middle of, I mean, the action has evolved so much in the fighting, and I mean, the brute force of it in a theater, the subwoofers and then the bass low sound. I mean, it was just so much going on. And right in the middle of it, here's this gleaming little bling imprint of the octopus on his cheek. I thought that was fun. It kind of kept it real because I think the series needs that. Some of these fight scenes are so intense. It almost gets away from one of the things they figured out by the third or fourth film, and that is kids were 50% of the audience. You have to keep it fun for the whole family. And the Daniel Craig Bond fights have been so intense, they need that balance, those other moments.
Yeah, it felt very intense. Like, you had that whole thing on the bridge, and it was really thrilling. Um, I think for me, sometimes it can be kind of tough because depending on how the action is cut, it can feel a bit disorienting, and I'm not always sure what's happening. So I did struggle to keep up a little bit, but I was still really into it. I guess it helped that the score that went along to these scenes was really good.
Yeah, and I love Hans Zimmer. So I'm kind of an old school guy. I love the score from the early films, but yeah, Hans Zimmer, he's like a chameleon. I don't care what film it is. He has this way of working with the action, and you think about the music when it's really well done, but it's not so well done and overplayed to where it distracts.
Right, like it doesn't dominate the film; it complements it.
Yeah, and one of the rules, and I think it's almost like the James Bond bingo card we all have in our laps when we watch a new Bond film. We're waiting for things so we can X the box, right? We're waiting for Bond, James Bond, X, and all the shaken, not stirred, and so one of the things on the card for me is one for everybody is the James Bond theme, of course. Dun, 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 and they went almost a decade once with no films using that music. They wanted to get away from it, and that made it cool when they went back to it, right? But there's another theme from the first three films called the 007 theme. And there's a way to where it's kind of cheesy. The music orchestration involves piccolos, and it's just a wacky sounding theme. But it was always used during fight scenes, yeah. And so I kept waiting for it in this film, but nope, they didn't press that button. They kept that one in the vault for this one anyway.
Yeah, I guess when I originally marathoned like all 20 something films, it didn't occur to me that there was like a decade without that theme you mentioned. I guess because I was watching them all closely together. So it makes sense that watching them as they come out, or like even long durations in between renting different films, like it would definitely stand
Yeah.
out.
Oh yeah, yeah, and it's part of the classic stuff, And I think I guess every now and then they have to get away from something to make sure it's not completely overdone. But yeah, I enjoy when the James Bond theme comes up. I enjoy it, and if you listen carefully to "No Time to Die," Billy's theme song. Musically, they quote some things from the James Bond theme, and they even have the echoey guitar. It's like a counter melody. I'm trying to remember, like after the second verse, and then again as the last chorus is winding down, they hit the spy chord, and so there's some of those touches in there. I thought that was cool.
Yeah, for sure. Like, when are we gonna get another Batman movie that has some sort of homage to the 1960s show's theme, you know? Like just a modernized version. Like I think that'd be really cool.
Oh my God, I love it. What a great idea. I mean, maybe they can't go as far as the boom, pow, zap things, but at least the tightrope walking side, turn the camera on its side and walking past, and the cameos where somebody sticks their head out as they're climbing the wall. Oh my God, that would be so great.
Yeah, the other day my friend was telling me about this villain from the 60s Batman show. Like I remember seeing a few episodes as a kid and a few more at some point during college. Like I haven't gone through the entire show, but I want to at some point cuz
Oh yeah.
I feel like I'm at that age where like when I was a preteen I wanted like dark and gritty, but I'm at that age where I'm appreciating the more comedic and campier stuff now. So I want to get through that whole series at some point. But my friend told me about this villain named Egghead who
Yes.
was played by Vincent Price
Vincent Price.
and made egg related puns. And it's like,
Excellent. Oh yeah, everything he said had an egg. It was great. And he had his head was white and bald like an egg. He had a bald cap on, and it was classic. I remember Egghead was one of my favorite villains on that show.
yeah. And like, speaking as someone who loves making puns and who's like delved into a lot of Batman mythology, I'm like sitting thinking to myself, how have I never heard of this villain? This sounds amazing.
Well, I'm with you. I think I need to sit down with that series. It's been, oh gosh, forever since I've seen it. So it'll all be fresh on my eyes again. Except I did cheat once. Somebody sent me a link to the climb the rope sideways camera on the wall. On YouTube, somebody made like a master mix compilation of all of those from that series when they would climb the rope sideways. And people's heads, celebrities would pop their heads out and have a little cameo. There's a great mix on YouTube if you want to search that out. It's fun. It's like 12 minutes. There were a lot of cameos in that show.
Yeah, like I saw the montage of all the egg puns he made in season 2 that my friend sent me. I'll probably link all of these in the show notes, like all these YouTube things we're mentioning.
Oh yeah, totally.
Yeah, the mid 60s were an interesting time. Like we had we had Star Trek, the original series, and the first few Bond films. Like it's crazy to think about, like how far these things have come.
Oh, absolutely. And I think there's something cool about villains and how I think the James Bond series taught us the films you mentioned from the 60s. A good Bond villain from the 60s. Dr. No, the first time we saw Blofeld, there were two films where we just saw him petting the cat before we got to see his face. And the obsessions, Goldfinger, like that dude loved gold. Like, the best Bond villains, I think, aren't the evil ones. It's the ones that are just completely obsessed with something. Yeah. I love the 60s Bond villains.
Yeah, served for a pretty good inspiration for stuff like Austin Powers and Johnny English.
Oh man, it does ruin some of the rewatches of old Bond films because I think of the Austin Powers riffs when I'm watching the source material. Yeah, it's funny.
Yeah, it's kind of weird how that happens, but I don't know. I guess it's a case by case basis because I've seen Spaceballs a couple of times, but it's never ruined my Star Wars watching experience. If anything, like I didn't find Spaceballs to be really that funny. I'm probably in the minority, but I mean,
No, yeah, I know what you mean. Yeah, I love Brooks and Rick Moranis, but yeah, a lot of it was funny because you get the joke because we've seen Star Wars so many times. But at the same time, I'll realize even though I like that, I'm not laughing out loud.
Yeah, it's something you watch at least once just to get the references, like why people are saying these quotes in these threads and what it means. But yeah. So getting back to No Time to Die, there's also this CIA agent named Logan Ash who orders a pursuit of Bond. And I was kind of confused about this because I was like,
Me
wait,
too.
like, aren't they like on the same side? But I guess like Logan Ash is in cahoots with Safin, which was quite a surprise.
Yeah, yeah, and that's a move from the old films. They used to do that every time they'd reintroduce Felix Leiter. Like we didn't know who was chasing Bond in the car, for 10 minutes, and then we later learn, oh, that's the CIA guy. And so there was some of that had me confused. I knew he was CIA, but I had no idea that he was working with Safine. And, because of the way the last film involved the entire British Secret Service getting changed, and the guy who's changing it is in cahoots, with Blofeld, I thought, oh, well, they should probably wait a while before we have another, double agent defector kind of situation. But yeah, with Logan Ash, I was confused for a good 5 minutes before that revelation.
Yeah, and we do eventually get the backstory for Safine. Like it's really interesting because he says that he likes wearing the mask every now and then because people wear a mask anyway, whether they realize it or not. Like whenever you're talking with someone, you'll act a certain way to conform to their sensibilities, and you'll try to, I guess, camouflage and try to blend in. And like how he like basically felt like he wanted to embrace his disfigurement in order to justify wearing the mask every now and then. And it's kind of weird because lots of villains have these disfigurements, but I kind of wish there were more heroes who had disfigurements because like not everyone who has disfigurements is a bad person, you know.
I love your point. Well said. There is a problem in film, and especially in the Bond series, where antagonists usually have some form of disability, and it perpetuates society othering people. When we other as a verb, when we other people, it's usually because we don't understand their plight, their identity, their disability, or whatever. And so, every time a Bond villain has a hook for a hand, or is missing an eye, or has a big massive scar, and so they're treated bad by society, and that led them to the evil ways. I always feel like, come on, that's a little overdone. But the scene you referenced, where he was Safine was explaining the identity, I was blown away by the writing in that, because I think there were 4 different screenwriters on this film. Like that scene when they talked about identity, Irving Goffman, there's this sociologist that they were playing on, who basically said, he wrote this book called the Presentation of Self in Everyday Life. And what Goffman's theory is that, when you put on this persona for the world, you're it's under receiver. Like you're sending out me, like I could put on a cowboy hat. But Goffman said, just because me, a half Japanese guy, puts on a cowboy hat and boots, I can walk down the street, and what I'm sending, cowboy, isn't necessarily received. It might be received as, why is the Asian guy wearing cowboy boots? And, it's so that when Bond's response to Safine's, soliloquy there about identity, when Bond revealed himself, quoted Goffman to say, you know what, the identity you're putting out isn't necessarily the one we're receiving. I was blown away. I thought, okay, kudos, screenwriters. That was great. And they're actually quoting sociologists, in a Bond film. How cool was that?
Yeah, that was such an amazing moment. Like it didn't register that they were quoting something as specific as that, but I read articles about it after seeing the movie because, well, like, this was the first Bond movie where I was really like, that made me want to delve into like all the influences and stuff. So that was pretty neat.
We should talk about Rami, though, as an actor playing Safine. I'm sure you saw the Freddie Mercury portrayal in that movie, and I kind of I haven't even seen that much that he's done, but going from Freddie Mercury to Safine, holy cow, does Rami Malek have some range? I mean, he is a great actor, isn't he?
Yeah, I actually haven't seen Bohemian Rhapsody yet. I've been meaning
Oh,
to,
okay.
but I've heard that he did really well as Freddie Mercury. I have seen him in this show called, I think it was called Mr. Nobody, and he has some pretty good range in that too, I think.
Cool. Yeah, he's on my list now. Anything he's in, I will go see. I'm impressed.
Yeah, I think Night at the Museum I saw him in, come to think of it.
Oh, I don't remember. I have seen that with my kids, but I don't remember. I must have walked out for a moment. What character was he not at the museum?
He played the Pharaoh
That was
leader.
him.
Yeah,
Oh, okay. All right. Holy cow.
yeah,
Huh.
yeah. I think me and my brother also saw him on a sitcom, either before or after that. But yeah, he's been in a bunch of things.
Cool. Yeah. I think he's going to continue to get bigger and better roles. He's something else.
Yeah, for sure. And so the reason that Safine kidnapped Valdo, the scientist, was because he wanted to make this weapon that inflicts people worldwide, so that like he wants to make everyone obtain burns and scars, so that they'll also have to conform to wearing a mask like he loves to do. And so they're really trying to take him down and save Voldo, get him out of Safine's hands.
You know, when they tested the weapon on the street sweeper who was just standing there eating a piece of pizza, and all of a sudden he's dead, and I see why they why they wrote that in. They had to demonstrate it, but man, that was brutal.
Yeah, I felt sorry for that street sweeper. And I already see online that some people are making these fan fiction stories where he gets away. Like it turns out he's like a wizard with a broom and that the explosion missed him. It's just ridiculous.
Oh my gosh, that's great.
Yeah, but yeah, that was pretty brutal. It reminded me of Rogue One and the whole Death Star test, and
Oh yeah.
it's pretty tragic, like testing something like that on, like, especially seeing like an innocent person who's like not even part of this whole war espionage thing. Like he's not in MI6 or CIA or Spectre. He's just some ordinary street sweeper trying to eat pizza.
Yeah, I wasn't sure if you know that was just funny and he was going to scamper away, but when they showed his head rolling down the street, I was like, oh wow, okay, that's that was brutal.
Yeah, it was pretty intense. There's also this really suspenseful scene on the frozen lake where Bond is fighting Safine, and like he falls through, like Bond falls through the cracks and into the water, and it feels like an echo of the beginning of the movie. And of course, Nomi and Paloma are trying to like save him, but also like fight Safine, and it was like a juggling act, that scene.
Yeah, yeah. It made me think of oh, I can't remember if it was Casino Royale or Quantum of Solace when they're in Vienna underwater and Eva Green's character drowns. It's interesting. There are so many things in this film, No Time to Die, that just seem to be, if not quoting directly, at least hearkening some of the ideas or cinematography from so many other Bond films. You could really watch it carefully and list them all, and that'd be a fun read actually, because there's a lot of it in this film.
Yeah, I kind of would like to see if there's ever been a Bond film that tried to include parallels to every single film that preceded it. I'm not sure if there has
Oh yeah,
been.
yeah. If there has been, maybe it's this one.
Yeah, it could be pretty subtle, not as
Yeah.
overt as having Bond like go skiing down a mountain, and you'd be like, oh, that's obviously like that Roger Moore movie.
Oh man, that scene, and he goes over the ledge, and you're like, he's dead. Oh no, wait, he's wearing a parachute that is of the British flag, the Union Jack, of course. Iconic, right?
Yeah. Do you have a favorite James Bond movie?
I would say probably Goldfinger, 1964, the third one of the series, just because it's got an obsessive villain, and a lot of the stuff was starting to take shape. The stuff that's on the bingo card that we want to check off every film. A lot of the stuff we saw for the first time in Goldfinger, and so much of it was new, but they got it right so quickly. You know, just 2 years after Dr. No, the first one, which was low budget and really does not hold up that well, you know, but Goldfinger holds up. So yeah, that's I'll have to say that's my favorite by far.
Do you have a favorite James Bond actor?
Ah, I'm gonna similar answer. I'll say Sean Connery just because I love the old school stuff. By the end, he was losing his touch, and he was wearing terry cloth short shorts, and some of the signs of the times were creeping into the film, and it just not everything was great throughout the entire Connery stretch, but from Russia with Love in '63, Goldfinger, and even Thunderball in '65. I think those are great. So I would answer Sean Connery. But if you were to pin me down and say, all right, not counting Sean Connery, who would it be? I think I would say Daniel Craig. If I couldn't say Sean, I think he's done a lot for the franchise, and it's not just him as the actor. With Casino Royale for the first time ever, 2006, and it blows my mind when I watch the old films. There's no cinematography in the old films. There are actors and there's a screenplay. The lighting is often bright and white, and there's day for night shooting, and all the way through the 80s, there's no impressive cinematography. But starting with Casino Royale in '06, I mean, I remember being pinned down to my theater seat. I mean, every piece of music, piece of lighting, camera movement revolved the motivations of the actors in the scene and where the story was going. That blew me away. So it's hard for me to not like Daniel Craig, because he brought that to the series along with the production team. And so Daniel Craig's Casino Royale on up to the film we're talking about today, it's they can't turn back. I mean, there's that level of cinematography quality that we expect now.
Yeah, I kind of wish that Casino Royale had come out in 2007, so we could be like, oh, it came out in 2007, but alas.
They missed it by a year.
Yeah. I mean, it would have been like the 45th anniversary of the Eon films. Like, that would have been cool. But
yeah.
I love Sean Connery as Indiana Jones's dad, and
yeah,
I did enjoy his take on James Bond. I remember when I originally marathoned all those movies, I remember thinking Roger Moore was my favorite. I don't know why, but
okay.
he was. And I think Connery and Moore have actually each been in 7 James Bond movies, if you include Never Say Never Again, which is interesting.
That's correct. 7 apiece. That's right.
Yeah, 007 apiece.
I love that you have a fondness for the Roger Moore Bond, because there is a debonair thing, a dashing thing that I don't think Daniel Craig has that at all. Connery had it, Lazenby had it for his one film, but Moore perfected it. Even though the collars were a little wider during some of his movies, Dalton had a little bit of it. Brosnan had it in spades, but there's something about just the debonair, chivalrous, tough, but still, prim and proper and sharp, but very British in the mannerisms and the ways and the speaking. I think that's something about Moore that should not be overlooked. And so, yeah, I dig that you're like not afraid to say, yeah, I liked Roger Moore. That's awesome.
Yeah, I can't really say why I liked him, but it's just something that I remember thinking. So I don't know if things would change if I rewatched all the films now, but they've had really good actors as James Bond.
Yeah.
So this kind of relates to a cameo that's in this movie. But for years, I've liked imagining that all the different James Bond actors changing is because James Bond is a Time Lord. I don't know if you've ever seen Doctor Who or familiar with it.
Oh, I love that. Yeah. Play that out. Keep going. Yeah, because you totally could make that argument, right?
Yeah, because Time Lords can regenerate, so they change their faces. And Timothy Dalton actually played a Time Lord named Rassilon in a Doctor Who special called The End of Time. So
whoa,
that to me, like in my head, confirmed, whoa, maybe James Bond is a Time Lord. And in No Time to Die, there's this really subtle cameo in the background where they're like in the streets, and there's a police public call box, and you see Jodie Whittaker walking out, and she's the current Doctor Who. So it's like
Ah,
this the same universe. Maybe James Bond is a Time
dude.
Lord.
Oh my gosh. All right, I'm gonna watch for that. Somehow I missed that, but and you're sure that was her? Oh, that's brilliant.
Yeah,
So
it's definitely
that
her.
oh man, yeah, that's great.
Yeah, and it's really weird to think about because it's like, I don't know, maybe Daniel Craig could be like the earliest incarnation, and then he has to go back in time, become Sean Connery, and then like you have On Her Majesty's Secret Service, and it's kind of like he'd have to do Diamonds Are Forever, knowing that he loses his wife, and then regenerate into Georges Lazenby, and knowing what's going to happen, and it makes it all the more tragic.
All right, you have to write this. I That's an article that I think will go viral. I love it. I love it, man. It's great.
Go write this James Bond fan fiction. But yeah, that was a. I really appreciated that little cameo there. Just fuel for the Whovians who might be watching.
It makes sense. I love it.
So, so there's this big showdown with Safine, and he kind of has the upper hand on Bond for a moment. So Nomi has to like come to the rescue, and she really get out holding her own. Like there are moments where he does get the upper hand, and it's like, oh no, I don't know if Nomi will survive. But then she like recovers, and like what did you think of this whole interaction?
Well, I thought they didn't do this, but I thought that it was going to be a classic kind of leave Bond to die, and then the villain walks away rather than watches him die, which means, of course, Bond escapes. And I thought they were going that direction, but they didn't. But I think it helped show that, and maybe this is what they were trying to do, show that James Bond is, can get hurt. He can get his butt kicked. He can, have to question his own ability to be as good of an agent as he once was. I thought that was a pivotal moment.
Yeah, and of course, Safine has to have like these final words before he's like taken down, and he talks about, "You may destroy me, but the mask will live on. Everyone wears a mask," and it was just so over the top, and I loved it.
Yeah, yeah. It made me think of The Incredibles. If everyone's a superhero, nobody's a superhero. I think when the bad guys have their big lines at the end of a movie that leave you with something to think about, I I I thought it was well written, and it makes me wonder about the next few films. And even though Safine, uh, I don't know how they would write this if he is still alive. Like maybe the mask will carry on somehow. It'll be interesting to see how they continue this on, since they've started doing that again.
Yeah, because they're like fighting in this like lab that has many levels, and he falls down a chasm. So I don't know if he like survives or not, but you could
Yeah,
be onto something. Like someone else could carry on with that mask. And I actually forgot to mention how like the mask is something that haunts Madeline, because like years before this, she encountered Safine at like some sort of opera, and he like
that's right.
showed her the mask, and she psychoanalyzed him, and he felt offended by that, and that's kind of why he's like fixated on ruining her life and Bond's life.
Which I think is pretty strong writing. I mean, it makes sense for his motivation.
Yeah, for sure. So yeah, I'm not sure like if he's alive or not. It'd be pretty cool if they brought him back in a believable way, but again, I don't
Hmm.
know how believable it is for him to survive that fall.
Yeah, yeah. I think they could, because if they brought back Christopher Waltz's Blofeld, it's and I think they're smart to do that. When we had a completely different storyline and villain every year for a couple decades there, I think we lost something about what makes a Bond film a Bond film. So I can't get enough of this Spectre Blofeld stuff. And yeah, I could see the Safine division of evil, continuing on. If he does somehow survive, they'll explain it. I can buy it. And that was one thing about the mask, that they got right up to the tippy toe line, but they didn't cross it. And had they crossed it, I would have been pissed, because we do expect a certain amount of reality in these films. I mean, gadgets are cool, and it's the highest, best technology and weaponry and all that stuff. So there's some fantasy, kind of over the top stuff with lasers or whatever. But if the mask gives like DC superhero powers, then that would have pissed me off. Almost as bad as when they put the GPS tracking blood stuff in Daniel Craig a few films ago. I was so pissed. I'm like, really? Like, anywhere in the world, what you just put in his blood through a syringe is going to transmit a signal to satellites and let M know where he's at, as well as his vitals. I was so pissed about that. That was too much.
Well, speaking of the gadgets, what was your favorite gadget in No Time to Die?
I love the simplicity of the earbuds. When he opened the case, I mean, it's like the old films when he would open the cigarette case, and it looked like, I don't know how product placement stuff works with Apple, but the fact that I love Apple products, but a lot of people think of Apple as an evil empire. So the fact that they had Safine using AirPods throughout the film, and when James switched them out with the one Q provided with the explosive earpods, I thought that was great.
Yeah, because I think I've heard this thing where if a character uses this company's products, then they're not a villain. So,
Oh.
yeah. So I'd have to look into that, see whether this decide to subvert that. Like maybe they change their minds or whatever to throw people off. But either way, it was a really genius device that they threw in there.
What was your favorite?
My favorite would have to be the back scratcher. Like it just looks like an unassuming back scratcher that Bond would use, but it has like tranquilizer darts that fire out of it, and like it's
That was
ridiculous, but it's like it works, you know?
Yeah, and I love the telescoping feature, how it's stretched out. That was Oh, that's great.
Yeah, he could like stretch it out to use it as a cane if he wanted to.
I'll be honest, I was really upset when John Cleese stopped being Q, but I like Ben Whishaw. I think as a young Q, the computer geek side of it too, I think he's a good quartermaster. Do you like him?
Yeah, I really like him. Didn't they kind of make fun of how young he was when he first appeared in these newer movies? Like, was that a thing, or am I misremembering?
No, I think you're right. It's like they had to address it, and
Yeah,
yeah, there was a line. Yeah, that was good.
maybe
Yeah.
Q was a Time Lord too. Or he could be a Q from Star Trek, the omnipotent beings from some other dimension or whatever it was.
I'm loving your crossover ideas. It's so good.
John Cleese will always be Sir Lancelot to me from Monty Python and the Holy Grail.
Yes. Yes. Don't make me taunt you a second time.
Yeah, whenever I think of King Arthur, that's the main depiction of King Arthur that I think of. Like, that's what my mind goes to first when I hear about King Arthur mythology. So you can thank my dad for showing me Monty Python and the Holy Grail as a kid.
Oh, I love it. I love it. I haven't talked to your dad about Python before, but that makes sense to me that he would love Python and introduce Python to you, to you at
Oh
a
yeah,
young age.
he loves
That's
it.
so great. That's so great. Yeah. So when you read up on like real King Arthur stuff, do you hear like coconuts in your head in the background?
Right. Like the only other King Arthur things I've watched are like I've seen Excalibur, which is like around 1980, I think. I vaguely remember watching that at some point. But the
Oh yeah.
but the other thing is Shrek the Third with like a young King Arthur, and like Shrek is trying to convince him to rule the kingdom. So
Yeah.
I think that movie gets too much flack, to be honest. But
Yeah. Yeah. I would agree with that.
yeah, and I think Eric Idle plays Merlin the magician in that one too.
Oh, okay. Yeah, that's right.
And John Cleese plays Fiona's dad. So yeah.
Yeah. I love John Cleese.
Yeah, Faulty Towers is a great show.
Yes, I love that show so much. I love Faulty Towers.
Yeah, I laugh out loud watching it.
Yeah, yeah.
All right, so at the end of No Time to Die, we get this resolution. Bond feels like he's at peace, and M is like, you can retire if you want, or you can come back, your choice. Just give it a few days and think about it. And he has like this little talk with Nomi. Bond is like, I never asked what your 00 number was. And at this point, she reveals it, and she smiles, and it's like, I knew what was coming, but she was like 007. And then Bond smiles, and then it cuts to credits.
So does that mean he's going to be the new M? I have so many questions.
Yeah, I don't know, because like M, throughout this movie, seemed like he was like getting tired, and like he felt ready to just retire. Like he jokes about it, but I'm not sure if that's what will happen. I think it would be really cool for James Bond to be the new M and Nomi to be the new 007. So it kind of leaves us on this little cliffhanger type of thing. It's like, well, where are they gonna go next? And I really appreciate this, like, especially if they go the Nomi direction. Because, like, James Bond, we're used to him being invincible, but it would be nice if we could, like, move to, like, a new character sort of taking on the mantle rather than worry about recasting, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I would be down for that. I know in the James Bond Facebook pages communities, there's been a lot of talk about how it's wrong, how Ian Fleming never would have made changes like that. Some of the changes and genders of some of the characters, are one thing, but I would disagree with that crowd. I'm with you. I think that could be really interesting, and maybe it's time to kick off a new era, so that would mean No Time to Die is kind of like a bookend from the stretch starting with 2006 Casino Royale. It would open up a whole new direction with some continuity too. Yeah, I'm going to be I am intrigued, but I can't wait to see what they do next.
Yeah, like it'd be a new character taking on the mantle, and they could bring back Daniel Craig for just a few scenes as them, like less screen time, so it wouldn't be like they wouldn't have to worry too much about scheduling, I would think. And
Yeah,
like you could let this new character be the face of the franchise for several films from here on out, at least.
yeah, I could totally see it.
All right, so with that, I guess we'll go into final thoughts. What were your overall thoughts on the film and score out of 10?
So overall thoughts, I think Daniel Craig, I think he left on a high note. I think the action, some of the stuff that he has made his own, it was there. It was great. The dialogue, the writing of the dialogue was stronger than I've seen in a while. And some of the subtleties were there. My bingo card was halfway checked, even with the DB5 car coming back, not the DB10. And so many things were there, and there were so many moments that I had no idea what was happening or what was about to happen, or had to make sense of it. 10 minutes later when they explained a thing. I wasn't sitting there knowing exactly what was going to happen, which we've all done with many Bond films. So overall, I would give this an 8 out of 10, and I haven't given an 8 since 2006's Casino Royale.
Nice. This was probably my favorite out of these reboot movies since Casino Royale. Like I was just really into it, and it's weird for me to say because I feel like I've been kind of a passive James Bond fan. Like I'd watch the movies, but I wouldn't feel as immersed into them as like other people would be. So I wouldn't follow all the news on it as much. But this one really made me want to like go back and rewatch some of them. So I guess for that reason, I would probably give it 8.75 out of 10. I think this could be a
Nice.
nice new direction for the franchise, and I hope they follow up on that promise. I think it could be really good going forward.
Nice. Nice.
All right, so coffee shaken, not stirred. Sorry, I just had to throw that in there before I forget.
I'm gonna have to start using that. I love it.
Yeah. So thank you for being on this episode. Where can people find your stuff like Bond with Coffee and whatnot?
Oh, great. Thanks for asking. There's a YouTube video version of it. We also put the video versions out on our Facebook page. Please follow us there. But the podcast, the straight audio, it's on Google Podcasts and iTunes and all Stitcher, all the normal places.
Yeah, I see it's on Apple. I'm like subscribed to it on Apple Podcasts as well.
Oh, cool. Thanks for subscribing.
Yeah. I watch the videos whenever they're in my feed, but I don't always know when they're up. So it's good that I subscribe to the Apple feed so that I know when they're up and I could just go and watch a video.
Ah, excellent. Thank you so much. Thanks for having me on the show. I absolutely love this podcast. And man, I love your ideas about time travelers and some of the other elements that I have never thought about before. I'm telling you, some of these you should write as an article. They're going to go viral. I love your ideas.
Yeah, gotta make it all canon. Yeah. As for my plugs, listeners can find my writing at stevenshinder.com. I have a fantasy horror comedy novel called Lemons Will Like Rain, which is available on Amazon. You can follow me at Steven Shinder on Twitter and Instagram, and Steven Shinder Storytelling on Facebook. And if you want to get in touch with this podcast, you can email delayedreplaypodcast@gmail.com. Send in your feedback, your thoughts on the films that have been discussed, and we might read your thoughts in a delayed reply segment. There hasn't been one yet, so be the first.
Cool.
And the next movie that will be talked about is Free Guy. And without further delay, have a good day. You were wrong, you know. Where are you? Wrong about what?
You said Malik was in Mr. Nobody, but you were thinking of Mr. Robot.
Oh, well, I mean, I guess I had Doom Patrol on the mind. You know, there's that villain, Mr. Nobody, and there's Robot Man, and Timothy Dalton is in that show too. You know, season 2 hype, but who are you? What are you? And are you all in my head?
We are very much physically in this world.
What? Can you say that a bit louder?
We are physically in this world.
Because sometimes I feel like I see you and you're in the shape of a cow or a bull, but that's not what you really are you? You say you're the cow, but I don't think that's what you really mean. Think of it as an acronym. Acronym for what? Just think back. The clues are there in that previous episodes. Oh, what? So now I have to re-listen to hours of myself talking? Why don't you just come out and reveal what you are and what you want?
More to be revealed next time.
Next time, I want answers now.